London, 1842. The Earl of Granbury was dead. The news swept through London's ballrooms like wildfire, setting society abuzz with speculation. Not about the late Earl himself, he had been a proper, if unremarkable, nobleman, but about his son, the newly ascended William Vance, Duke of Huntington. He must marry now, declared Lady Wiltshire to her circle of confidants at Lady Dearborn's spring soiree. A duke cannot go on as a bachelor indefinitely, particularly not one with estates in such precarious circumstances. The ladies nodded sagely. Though the Vance family name carried centuries of prestige, whispers of dwindling coffers had circulated for years. The late Earl's penchant for the gaming tables had only hastened what generations of extravagance had begun. Beyond the ballroom's gleaming chandeliers in his father's, now his, townhouse on Grosvenor Square, William Vance sat alone in the study, surrounded by ledgers that confirmed his worst fears. The candlelight cast long shadows across his stern features as he reviewed the dismal figures for the third time, hoping they might somehow improve upon further inspection. They did not. Utterly ruined, he muttered, closing the final ledger with a decisive snap. He ran a hand through his dark hair, dishevelled after hours of accounting. At 32, William had long managed his own modest but successful investments, living comfortably on his allowance as the heir presumptive. But nothing had prepared him for the catastrophic state of the dukedom's finances. He rose and poured himself a generous measure of brandy, the amber liquid catching the firelight as he contemplated his predicament. The ducal estates required immediate attention. Tenants awaited overdue improvements, the ancestral home in Derbyshire needed urgent repairs, and creditors would soon come calling. His father's death had thrust upon him not just a title, but a crumbling legacy. William had never considered himself a romantic man. Life had taught him that sentiment was a luxury afforded to those without responsibility. His own parents' marriage had been arranged, cordial but distant, and he had witnessed firsthand how passion among the aristocracy inevitably faded into polite indifference. Love was an illusion peddled in novels, not a foundation upon which to build one's future. What he needed was a solution, practical, decisive, without sentiment. A wife, he concluded aloud, his voice echoing in the empty room. A wife with a substantial dowry. The decision, once reached, brought a measure of peace. Marriage was, after all, a business arrangement among their class, a means to forge alliances, secure bloodlines, and in cases such as his, restore depleted coffers. He would approach it with the same methodical precision he applied to his investments. The season was already underway. Society's marriage mart would be teeming with eligible young ladies, their fathers eager to exchange fortunes for titles. William would simply need to select the most advantageous match, an heiress, preferably one with connections and a malleable disposition who wouldn't interfere with his affairs once the marriage contract was signed. Love need not enter into the equation at all. 3 weeks later, William stood at the periphery of Countess Ellington's ballroom, surveying the crowd with calculated interest. His return to society as the Duke of Huntington had generated precisely the response he anticipated, a mixture of deference, curiosity, and predatory speculation. "Your Grace," came a simpering voice at his elbow. "How delightful to see you rejoining society after your period of mourning." William turned to find Lady Hargrove, one of London's most notorious matchmakers, flanked by her daughter, a pleasant-looking girl with an unfortunate resemblance to her bulldog-faced father. "Lady Hargrove," he acknowledged with a correct bow. "Miss Hargrove." "We were devastated to hear about your dear father," Lady Hargrove continued. "Such a charming man. I always said to Lord Hargrove, there goes a gentleman who understands the importance of proper society. But how are you finding your new responsibilities?" "Overwhelming, I expect. A duke needs a duchess, you know, someone to manage the household affairs." William suppressed a smile at her transparency. "Indeed, Lady Hargrove. I find myself increasingly persuaded of that fact. The woman practically vibrated with excitement. Naturally, Your Grace. Why, just this evening I was remarking to the Countess how the right match can solve so many challenges a new duke might face. William's jaw tightened imperceptibly, so his financial difficulties were already common knowledge. He would need to move quickly to secure a match before the rumors damaged his prospects. "You're most perceptive," he replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe Lord Wellington is attempting to catch my attention." He escaped with practiced ease, making his way through the ballroom with deliberate purpose. Already he had compiled a mental list of potential candidates. Miss Abernethy, with her father's banking fortune; Lady Caroline Pembroke, whose coal mines in the north yielded substantial annual returns; the American Miss Jenkins, whose vulgar millions might override her even more vulgar accent. It was during this assessment that William first noticed her, a young woman standing apart from the crowd, engaged in conversation with an elderly gentleman. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, not in the way of the season's celebrated diamonds. Her figure was too slender, her complexion too warm for current fashions, but something in her bearing caught his attention. Unlike the other young ladies who constantly scanned the room for more advantageous conversations, she focused entirely on her companion, listening with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Who is that woman?" William inquired of Lord Pembroke, who had materialized at his side with an offered glass of champagne. The older man followed his gaze. "Ah, Miss Sophia Whitfield, daughter of the late Sir Thomas Whitfield. The gentleman she's speaking with is her uncle, Admiral Whitfield. I don't recall seeing her before." "No, you wouldn't have. She spent the past several years in the country. This is her first season in London since her father's passing. Modest fortune, but impeccable lineage, descended from the Devonshires on her mother's side." William considered this information. Modest fortune likely meant insufficient for his needs, but there was something in her self-possessed demeanor that intrigued him. "Is she seeking a match?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Lord Pembroke raised an eyebrow. "I believe that's the general purpose of a young lady's presence at such gatherings, is it not? Though Miss Whitfield seems less aggressive in her pursuit than most. She turned down two perfectly acceptable offers last season, I'm told. Holding out for love, perhaps." He said this with the faint disdain of a man who viewed such notions as impractical at best. William found himself observing Miss Whitfield throughout the evening. She danced twice, once with her uncle and once with a young viscount, and spent the remainder of her time in conversation with various matrons. She didn't simper or flaunt, didn't position herself to capture attention. In fact, she seemed almost indifferent to the marriage marts swirling around her. It was refreshing. As the evening wore on, William made the acquaintance of several prospective heiresses, maintaining pleasant, if shallow, conversations about the weather, the quality of the orchestra, and the upcoming events of the season. Each interaction reinforced his conclusion. Marriage would be a transaction, nothing more. He would provide a title and position. His bride would provide the funds to restore his estates. Compatibility beyond these essentials was unnecessary, yet his gaze continued to drift toward Miss Whitfield. Near midnight, he found himself approaching her during a lull in the dancing. She stood beside a potted palm, observing the crowd with a slight smile that suggested she found the proceedings more amusing than enthralling. "Miss Whitfield," he said, bowing formally, "I don't believe we've been introduced." "I am Huntington." Her eyes widened slightly, the only indication that she recognized his title, before she executed a perfect curtsy. "Your Grace, it's an honor." "I noticed you've danced little this evening," he observed. "Are the gentlemen of London so intimidated by your beauty that they dare not approach?" It was a practiced compliment, the kind he had delivered countless times, yet something in her expression suggested she found it wanting. "Perhaps they are intimidated by my advanced age, Your Grace," she replied with a hint of dry humor. At 23, I'm practically on the shelf. William found himself unexpectedly amused, a veritable spinster. Indeed. Soon I shall acquire a cat and devote myself to dispensing unwanted advice to my younger relatives. A genuine smile tugged at his lips, the first of the evening. Perhaps I might delay your descent into spinsterhood by claiming the next dance. She regarded him thoughtfully, as if weighing some private calculation. That would be acceptable, Your Grace, though I warn you that my dancing skills have not improved with age. The orchestra struck up a waltz, still considered somewhat scandalous in more conservative circles, though increasingly common at fashionable gatherings. William led Miss Whitfield onto the floor, aware of the speculative gazes following them. A duke's choice of dance partner was never without significance. As they took their positions, he was struck by how perfectly her hand fit in his. She moved with unexpected grace, following his lead with ease that contradicted her self-deprecating warning. "You dance quite well for one so decrepit," he remarked, guiding her through a turn. "You're too kind to mention it, Your Grace. We elderly ladies do try to maintain certain skills, even as we wither away." William found himself chuckling. "Tell me, Miss Whitfield, do you approach all of life with such refreshing candor, or is it reserved for unsuspecting dance partners?" "Only for dance partners who offer transparent flattery, I assure you." "Transparent. With respect, Your Grace, you've spent the evening cataloguing potential brides with the clinical detachment of a man selecting horseflesh at Tattersall's. When you approached me, you had already determined I was unsuitable for your purposes, which allowed you the freedom to be momentarily diverted." William nearly missed a step, startled by her perception. "That's a rather bold assessment. Is it inaccurate?" He studied her face, finding no coquetry there, only genuine curiosity. "I'm recently titled," he said carefully. "Certain responsibilities accompany the position, including a profitable marriage. Society would certainly deem it prudent." She nodded, as if he had confirmed something she already knew. "Then I wish you success in your endeavors, Your Grace. Though I hope you'll forgive me for suggesting that marriage might be more bearable if it included elements beyond financial advantage." "Such as?" "Compatibility, mutual respect. Shared interests, perhaps." "Love?" he asked, a touch of skepticism entering his tone. "I wouldn't presume to suggest anything so radical to a duke," she replied, her eyes sparkling with subdued mischief. "Though I've heard rumors that it occasionally exists, even among the peerage." The dance ended before he could respond, and William found himself reluctantly returning Miss Whitfield to her uncle. As he bowed over her hand, he experienced an unfamiliar impulse to prolong their conversation. "Perhaps we might continue our discussion at Lady Hartwell's garden party tomorrow," he suggested. "Alas, I won't be attending," she replied. "My aunt has organized visits to several charitable endeavors this week. We'll be at the Whitecapel Children's Home tomorrow." "Charitable work," he repeated, somehow unsurprised that she would engage in such pursuits rather than the endless social calls that occupied most young ladies. "Someone must concern themselves with those less fortunate, Your Grace. Even as we dance, children starve in the streets not 3 miles from here." There was no accusation in her tone, merely a statement of fact, yet William felt unexpectedly defensive. "Indeed, most commendable, Miss Whitfield." "Not commendable," she corrected gently. "Necessary. Good evening, Your Grace. I wish you luck with your search." With that, she curtsied and departed on her uncle's arm, leaving William with the distinct impression that he had been assessed, and somehow found wanting, a novel experience for a duke. More puzzling still was his inexplicable desire to change her opinion. The following week found William at Lady Hathaway's musicale, enduring a succession of young ladies demonstrating questionable musical talents with painful enthusiasm. He had narrowed his matrimonial prospects to 3 candidates, Miss Abernethy, whose father had hinted at a dowry that would handily resolve his financial concerns, Lady Emmeline Darlington, whose family connections would prove advantageous, and Miss Fairchild, whose American fortunes were so vast that even her grating accent seemed less offensive with each passing day. Yet as he applauded Miss Fairchild's vigorous assault on a Beethoven sonata, his attention drifted to the movement near the entrance. Sophia Whitfield had arrived, accompanied by an older woman he presumed to be her aunt. She wore a gown of deep blue that complemented her complexion far better than the insipid pastels favored by most debutantes. Her chestnut hair was arranged simply but elegantly, without the excessive ornaments that adorned other ladies' coiffures. William found himself watching as she greeted several acquaintances, her expression animated as she conversed with an elderly dowager. When she laughed at something the older woman said, the sound carried across the room, genuine and unaffected. "Your Grace," whispered Miss Fairchild, who had finished her performance and now stood before him, clearly expecting compliments. "Most spirited," he offered, rising to bow. "Oh, thank you. Mamma always says I play with exceptional feeling. Perhaps you might turn the pages for my next piece." "I fear I've promised the next set to the Dowager Countess," he lied smoothly. "Another time, perhaps." Before the young lady could protest, William made his escape, circulating through the room with practiced ease until he found himself, as if by accident, near Miss Whitfield. "We meet again, Miss Whitfield," he said, bowing. She turned, surprise registering briefly before she curtsied. "Your Grace, how unexpected." "I assure you, the surprise is mutual. I was led to believe you preferred charitable endeavors to society functions." "My aunt insisted," she replied with a small smile. "Apparently, one cannot spend every day among orphans without raising eyebrows. Something about appearing too philanthropic. It might give gentlemen the impression I harbor radical tendencies." "And do you harbor radical tendencies, that is?" "Only the most dangerous kind, Your Grace. Independent thought." William found himself charmed by her wit. "A perilous condition indeed. Tell me, how fared your visit to White-Capel? Were lives transformed by your beneficence?" He had meant it as light banter, but something in her expression shifted, becoming more reserved. "No lives were transformed," she said quietly. "A few hungry children were fed, some received warm clothing, others learned their letters for an afternoon. Small comforts in a sea of suffering." "But if enough people offered small comforts," she trailed off, then shook her head. "Forgive me, I'm being terribly serious at a social gathering. My aunt would be mortified." "No need for apologies," William said, genuinely intrigued by her passion. "It's refreshing to discuss something of substance amidst conversations about ribbons and the weather." "Is it?" She regarded him curiously. "I would have thought such topics tedious for a gentleman of your position." "Tedious topics are the backbone of polite society, Miss Whitfield. One endures them as one endures English weather, with resignation and occasional moments of unexpected pleasure." "Like our conversation at the Ellington ball?" she asked, a glimmer of amusement returning to her eyes. "Precisely," he confirmed, finding himself smiling again. "Though I still maintain you were rather harsh in your assessment of my character." "Was I?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "I merely observed what was evident to anyone paying attention. You require a wealthy wife to restore your estates. It's hardly scandalous, more a matter of aristocratic tradition." William stiffened, his smile fading. "You seem remarkably well informed about my circumstances." "London thrives on gossip, Your Grace. The financial state of the Vance holdings has been a topic of speculation since before your father's passing. I meant no offense." But he was offended, not by her knowledge of his situation, which he had known would be common currency among the ton, but by the matter-of-fact way she reduced his pursuit to cold calculation. "Even if it was entirely accurate. And what of your own circumstances, Miss Whitfield?" he asked, his tone cooler than before. What brings you to the marriage mart if not the pursuit of an advantageous match? Family obligation, primarily, she admitted candidly. My aunt and uncle feel it their duty to see me settled. I've agreed to a season to appease them, though I harbor few illusions about my prospects. False modesty doesn't become you. It isn't modesty, false or otherwise. I'm 23, possess a modest fortune that precludes the need for desperate fortune hunting, and have interests that many find unsuitable for a potential wife. I'm neither beautiful enough to overcome these deficiencies nor wealthy enough to render them irrelevant. William studied her face, the intelligent eyes, the determined chin, the mouth that seemed perpetually on the verge of a smile. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, yet he found himself more drawn to her features than to any of the season's celebrated beauties. I think you underestimate your appeal, he said quietly. She blinked, clearly surprised by his sincerity. That's kind of you to say. Not kind, accurate. He hesitated, then added, perhaps you might permit me to call on you tomorrow. I find myself curious about these unsuitable interests of yours. Sophia regarded him with open skepticism. I'm flattered, Your Grace, but surely your time would be better spent cultivating the acquaintance of ladies whose fortunes align with your requirements. I'm capable of managing my own schedule, Miss Whitfield, he replied, more tersely than he'd intended. Will 2 o'clock be convenient? After a moment's consideration, she nodded. My aunt and uncle reside on Upper Brook Street, number 42. Until tomorrow, then. As William rejoined the gathering, making the expected rounds of conversation, he questioned his own actions. Calling on Sophia Whitfield served no practical purpose in his search for a suitable duchess. Yet the prospect of continuing their conversation intrigued him more than any of the evening's remaining entertainments. It was mere curiosity, he assured himself, nothing more. The following afternoon found William's carriage pulling up before a respectable townhouse on Upper Brook Street. It was a handsome residence, though considerably less grand than those belonging to the peers whose daughters he had been courting. He was shown into a well-appointed drawing-room where Sophia and her aunt, Mrs. Elena Whitfield, awaited him. Your Grace, Mrs. Whitfield exclaimed, rising to curtsy deeply. What an unexpected honor. We're quite overwhelmed. Mrs. Whitfield, he acknowledged with a bow. Miss Whitfield, I appreciate your receiving me on such short notice. As if we would refuse a duke, the older woman said with a nervous laugh. I've ordered tea. I hope that's acceptable. We could certainly arrange for something more substantial if you prefer. Tea is perfect, he assured her, taking the seat she indicated. Sophia sat quietly, observing the exchange with a faint smile that suggested she found her aunt's fluttering amusing. She wore a simple day dress of sage green that complemented her complexion, her hair arranged in a modest chignon that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. I understand from Miss Whitfield that you're involved in various charitable endeavors, William said, addressing Mrs. Whitfield as propriety demanded, though his attention remained on Sophia. Oh, yes, indeed, the older woman replied. My husband's family has long supported several worthy causes. The Admiral sits on the board of the Seamen's Hospital, of course, and I maintain an interest in the Ladies' Benevolent Society. Sophia has her own particular projects, which include the Whitecapel Children's Home, I believe, William prompted, turning to Sophia. She nodded, among others. I also assist at the Women's Employment Bureau and occasionally teach at a small school for factory workers' children in Cheapside. Mrs. Whitfield sighed. My niece's compassion exceeds her concern for her own well-being, I'm afraid. We've had endless discussions about the propriety of a young lady of her station venturing into such areas unescorted. I'm hardly unescorted, Aunt, Sophia countered gently. Mrs. Trent accompanies me whenever I leave Mayfair, and Mr. Jenkins, the director of the home, ensures we are safely conveyed back to more respectable neighborhoods afterward. William found himself both impressed and concerned by her activities. The East End can be dangerous, even with escorts. Far more dangerous for those who live there permanently than for visitors, Sophia replied. The real danger lies in society's willingness to ignore suffering that doesn't directly affect them. Mrs. Whitfield looked mortified. Sophia, His Grace doesn't wish to hear your reformist opinions. Actually, William said, surprising himself, I find Miss Whitfield's perspective quite thought-provoking. Tell me, what improvements would you make to these institutions if resources were unlimited? Sophia's eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm, and for the next quarter hour, she outlined a vision of expanded educational opportunities, improved housing conditions, and employment training programs that would allow the poor to elevate their circumstances through their own efforts rather than rely perpetually on charity. The current system of almsgiving merely sustains people in poverty, she explained, leaning forward earnestly. What's needed is systematic change that addresses the root causes: lack of education, unsafe working conditions, inadequate housing. These are complex societal problems, William observed. Surely you don't believe they can be solved through individual charitable efforts? Not entirely, no. True change would require legislative action, improved factory regulations, compulsory education. She caught her aunt's increasingly alarmed expression and smiled ruefully. But I've strayed into political waters now, which is decidedly improper for a drawing-room conversation. Particularly with a peer who holds a vote in the House of Lords, William noted, amused by her sudden awareness of propriety. I would never presume to influence your Grace's political positions, she replied, though her tone suggested she might very much like to do exactly that. The arrival of tea provided a welcome transition to lighter topics. William found himself discussing literature, music, and even agricultural innovations with surprising enjoyment. Sophia was well-read and articulate, offering opinions that were clearly her own rather than rehearsed sentiments designed to appeal to a prospective suitor. As the hour drew to a close, Mrs. Whitfield excused herself to attend to household matters, leaving them briefly alone, though the drawing-room door remained properly ajar. I must thank you, Your Grace, Sophia said once her aunt had departed. For what? For indulging my enthusiasm on topics that must seem terribly dreary compared to the usual social discourse. On the contrary, he replied honestly, I found it refreshing. Most young ladies seem to have no opinions whatsoever beyond a preference for certain ribbons. They have opinions, Sophia corrected. They've simply learned to suppress them in the presence of gentlemen who might find female intellect off-putting. William considered this a fair assessment, though it creates a rather tedious social environment. Indeed, one almost pities the gentleman forced to endure endless conversations devoid of substance. Almost, he agreed with a smile. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when William reluctantly acknowledged the time. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. It was no imposition, Sophia assured him, rising as he stood. Your visit has considerably elevated my aunt's standing among her friends. She'll dine out on the story for weeks. Then I'm pleased to have been of service, he said, bowing over her hand. Perhaps you might permit me to escort you and your aunt to the Botanical Society exhibition tomorrow. I understand they've acquired several rare specimens from the Amazon. Sophia appeared genuinely surprised by the invitation. That's very kind, but surely you have more pressing engagements. None that involve rare Amazonian flora. She studied him with that disconcertingly perceptive gaze. Your Grace, while I've enjoyed our conversation immensely, I hope you haven't misconstrued my circumstances. My fortune remains exactly as modest as reported. William felt a flash of irritation. I'm aware of your circumstances, Miss Whitfield. I'm simply proposing an outing, not a marriage contract. Of course, she said, though her expression remained skeptical. In that case, we'd be delighted to accompany you. As William departed, he found himself both looking forward to the following day and questioning his own motives. He had pressing business with his solicitor regarding estate matters. The logical course would be to focus on courting Miss Abernethy or Lady Emmeline, whose fortunes could resolve his financial difficulties. Instead, he was planning botanical excursions with a woman whose dowry couldn't save a single one of his properties. Perhaps, he rationalized, maintaining a diverse acquaintance during the season was simply good strategy. It prevented society from determining his intentions prematurely, which could weaken his negotiating position with potential father-in-laws. It had nothing to do with Sophia Whitfield's quick wit, intelligent conversation, or the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. Nothing whatsoever. The Botanical Society exhibition proved unexpectedly enjoyable. Sophia's genuine interest in the plants, not merely as decorative specimens, but for their medicinal properties and cultural significance, led to spirited discussions with several of the Society's members. William found himself impressed by her knowledge and increasingly enchanted by her enthusiasm. The indigenous peoples of Brazil have used this plant to treat fevers for centuries, she explained, as they examined a particularly exotic specimen. European physicians dismissed their knowledge as primitive until explorers witnessed its efficacy firsthand. "You've studied botany formally?" William asked, offering his arm as they moved to the next display. "Informally," she corrected. "My father maintained an extensive library, and I've had access to several scholarly journals through my uncle's connections. The relationship between plants and medicine has always fascinated me. A rather unusual interest for a young lady. Hence my dismal marriage prospects," she replied cheerfully. "Few gentlemen seek wives who can discourse on the properties of cinchona bark at dinner parties." "Their loss," William said, surprising himself with his sincerity. She glanced up at him, her expression softening. "That's remarkably generous of you, Your Grace." "William," he said impulsively. "My friends call me William." "Are we friends, then?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes searching. "I'd like to think we could be." "Mrs. Whitfield, who had been trailing slightly behind them while conversing with an acquaintance, rejoined them before Sophia could respond. "Such a fascinating exhibition. Lady Hargrove was just telling me that the Duke of Montrose has donated several specimens from his private greenhouse. Quite the philanthropist, apparently." "Indeed," William agreed, noting the speculative glances directed their way by other patrons. A duke escorting an unmarried lady of moderate standing was bound to generate gossip, regardless of the presence of a chaperone. After completing their tour of the exhibition, William suggested refreshments at Gunter's tea shop, where they spent another pleasant hour in conversation. Throughout, he found himself increasingly drawn to Sophia's intelligence and genuine warmth. She treated everyone, from the Duke at her side to the serving girl who brought their tea, with the same respectful attention. It was a quality William had rarely observed in society, where deference flowed upward according to rank and fortune, with little consideration for those below one's station. As they prepared to depart, William found himself reluctant to end their outing. "Perhaps you would consider attending the opera tomorrow evening. I have access to my family's box." "Mrs. Whitfield looked ready to accept immediately, but Sophia shook her head. "I'm afraid we're engaged tomorrow evening. Lord and Lady Pembroke are hosting a dinner party." "Ah," William said, masking his disappointment. "Another time, perhaps." "Though we will be at Lady Hargrove's ball the following evening," Mrs. Whitfield interjected hopefully. "Then I shall look forward to it," William replied, bowing over Sophia's hand. As their eyes met, he experienced an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a sensation he promptly attributed to the pleasant spring weather rather than the lady herself. Over the next fortnight, William found himself seeking Sophia's company with increasing frequency. They encountered each other at various social events, where he inevitably gravitated toward her witty conversation. He escorted her and her aunt to a lecture at the Royal Society, a performance of Shakespeare at the Theatre Royal, and a small musical gathering at Lord Wellington's home. Each meeting deepened his appreciation for her character, her compassion, her intelligence, her refreshing honesty. He discovered they shared similar tastes in literature, a love of chess, and a mutual disdain for the more frivolous aspects of society. What began as curiosity had evolved into genuine regard, and William found himself thinking of Sophia at the most inopportune moments, during meetings with his steward, while reviewing correspondence, as he dressed for evening engagements. He caught himself wondering what she might think of a particular book or how she would respond to a political development mentioned in the Times. It was unsettling. More unsettling still was the growing awareness that his practical marriage plans remained unfulfilled. While he maintained cordial relationships with his prospective heiresses, he had made no significant progress toward securing a betrothal with any of them. Each time he considered advancing his suit with Miss Abernethy or Lady Emmeline, he found himself comparing them unfavorably to Sophia Whitfield. The situation came to a head one afternoon in late April, when William's solicitor arrived for their weekly meeting regarding the estate finances. "I'm afraid the news isn't improving, Your Grace, Mr. Halloway said, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the documents spread across the library table. "The mortgage on the Derbyshire property falls due in 6 months, and the repairs to the East Wing cannot be postponed much longer without risking structural damage. Additionally, there are the tenant improvements to consider. The northern farms require new drainage systems before autumn." William pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting a growing headache. "What of the timber sales?" "They've yielded less than anticipated due to falling prices. We might consider selling the London property." "No," William interrupted firmly. "The townhouse remains in the family." Mr. Halloway nodded, unsurprised. "Then I must reiterate my previous advice. A significant infusion of capital is needed, and promptly. The most expedient solution would be—" "A wealthy marriage. Yes, I'm aware." William rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where spring flowers were beginning to bloom. "What fortune would be required to resolve our immediate difficulties?" The solicitor consulted his notes. "To address the most pressing concerns and establish a reserve for future contingencies, no less than £50,000. It was a substantial sum, though not unprecedented in aristocratic marriages. Both Miss Abernethy and Lady Emmeline could easily provide such a dowry. Even Miss Fairchild, with her American millions, would consider it a reasonable investment for a ducal title. Sophia Whitfield's modest fortune would fall far short of the mark. "I understand," William said, turning back to his solicitor. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Halloway." After the man departed, William remained in the library, contemplating his position. The practical course was clear. He must secure an advantageous marriage without delay. His tenants, his staff, and the legacy of his family depended upon it. Yet when he imagined standing at the altar, the bride beside him wore Sophia's face. "This is madness," he muttered, pouring himself a generous measure of brandy. "Complete madness." Sophia herself had acknowledged the realities of his situation. She harbored no illusions about her suitability as a duchess. Their growing friendship, for he could no longer deny that's what it had become, was pleasant but ultimately inconsequential when weighed against his responsibilities. He would attend Lady Hathaway's ball that evening, where both Miss Abernethy and Lady Emmeline would be present. He would dance with each, pay particular attention to whichever seemed most receptive, and begin the process of securing his future. Sophia Whitfield would remain a pleasant acquaintance, nothing more. Lady Hathaway's ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the elite of London society circulating beneath their light, in a symphony of silk, jewels, and calculated social maneuvers. William arrived fashionably late, aware of the subtle shift in attention as he entered, the mothers with eligible daughters straightening almost imperceptibly, the young ladies adopting their most appealing expressions. He made his expected rounds, exchanging pleasantries with various dignitaries before approaching Miss Abernethy, who stood with her parents near the refreshment table. "Miss Abernethy," he said, bowing, "you look particularly lovely this evening." The young woman blushed prettily, her golden curls arranged fashionably around her heart-shaped face. She was, by any standard, a beauty, with a substantial dowry to enhance her appeal. William had danced with her at 3 previous events and found her to be pleasant, if somewhat insipid company. "Your Grace," she replied with a perfect curtsy. "How kind of you to say so. I hope I might claim your hand for the first waltz." "I would be honored." Her parents beamed their approval, and William engaged them in appropriate conversation until the orchestra began to play. As he led Miss Abernethy onto the floor, he was acutely conscious of his purpose. This was no mere social obligation. It was the beginning of a courtship that could save his dukedom. "Are you enjoying the season, Miss Abernethy?" he inquired as they began to dance. "Oh, very much, Your Grace. The balls are so elegant, and I adore the musicales. Mamma says this has been the most splendid season in years." "Indeed. And have you found London society to your liking?" "Everyone has been most welcoming," she assured him, "though I confess the city itself is rather overwhelming after Hampshire. So many people, such noise and bustle." "It can be quite overwhelming," William agreed, guiding her through a turn, "though one eventually becomes accustomed to it." Miss Abernethy continued with pleasant observations about various social events, her new gowns, and the delightful weather they'd been enjoying. William maintained the expected responses while his mind catalogued her merits as a potential duchess. Beautiful, properly educated, from a respectable family, and most importantly, in possession of a fortune that could resolve his financial difficulties. Yet as the dance continued, he found himself increasingly distracted. His gaze drifted over her shoulder, scanning the ballroom for a familiar figure in a simple but elegant gown, chestnut hair arranged without excessive ornamentation. He spotted Sophia across the room, engaged in conversation with an elderly gentleman William recognized as a prominent botanist. Her expression was animated, her hands occasionally gesturing to emphasize a point. Even from a distance, her genuine enthusiasm was evident. "Your Grace," Miss Abernethy's voice recalled his attention. "I asked if you plan to attend Lady Pembroke's garden party next week." "My apologies," he said, forcing his focus back to his partner. "Yes, I believe so. Will you be present?" "Oh yes, Papa has promised to escort us. Perhaps we might view the rose garden together. I understand Lady Pembroke has cultivated several rare varieties." "That would be most pleasant," William replied automatically, though his attention had wandered again. Sophia was now being led onto the dance floor by a young man William didn't immediately recognize. Something about the way the fellow leaned too close during their conversation sparked an irrational flare of irritation. Who was this presumptuous upstart, and why was Sophia smiling at whatever insipid comment he just made? "Your Grace," Miss Abernethy prompted again, her tone betraying a hint of confusion at his continued distraction. "Forgive me," William said, focusing on her with deliberate effort. "The rose garden sounds delightful. You're fond of flowers." "Oh, yes. They're so pretty, especially pink ones." The dance mercifully ended, and William escorted Miss Abernethy back to her parents with appropriate compliments. He then fulfilled his obligation to dance with Lady Emmeline, who proved a more engaging conversationalist, but still failed to capture his attention completely. Throughout the evening, he found himself tracking Sophia's movements with increasing frequency. She danced several times, too many times, in his opinion, and engaged in what appeared to be animated conversations with various partners. The irrational surge of jealousy he experienced each time she smiled at another gentleman was both unprecedented and unwelcome. During a lull in the proceedings, William finally managed to approach her as she stood near an open terrace door, apparently seeking a respite from the crowded ballroom. "Miss Whitfield," he said, bowing, "you seem to be enjoying yourself this evening." She turned, her expression brightening in a way that sent an unfamiliar warmth through his chest. "Your Grace, yes, it's been quite pleasant. Professor Hamilton was telling me about his recent expedition to the Hebrides. Apparently, several rare moss species thrive there due to the unique climate conditions." "Fascinating," William replied, genuinely amused by her enthusiasm for what most would consider a terribly dull topic. "And your other dance partners, did they provide equally stimulating conversation about bryophytes?" Sophia laughed. "I fear not. Lord Tilney spoke exclusively about his new hunter and Mr. Roberts appeared most interested, in my opinion, of his waistcoat. Both riveting subjects, I'm sure." "Quite," she agreed with mock solemnity, "though neither compares to the excitement of rare moss varieties." William smiled, the tension he'd been carrying all evening easing somewhat. "Perhaps I might provide a change of topic. I've secured tickets for the Philharmonic Society's performance next Wednesday. Beethoven's Seventh Symphony is featured. I recall you mentioned an appreciation for his work." "That's very kind," Sophia said, her expression softening, "but I believe you should direct such invitations to Miss Abernethy or Lady Emmeline." "Your attentions this evening have been noted." William stiffened. "My attentions." "You've danced with both ladies and engaged their families in extended conversation. Society draws inevitable conclusions from such behavior." She offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wouldn't wish to interfere with your courtship plans." "You've been monitoring my activities, Miss Whitfield." "Merely observing what everyone else has observed," she replied evenly. "You're pursuing an advantageous match, as we've discussed." "It's perfectly sensible. And if I wished to invite you to the symphony, regardless?" Sophia regarded him thoughtfully. "Then I would have to decline for both our sakes. Your Grace, I've valued our friendship immensely. But we both understand your position requires certain practicalities." Before William could respond, Mrs. Whitfield appeared at her niece's side. "There you are, Sophia. Lady Hargrove is asking after you." "Oh, good evening, Your Grace." "Mrs. Whitfield," he acknowledged with a bow, still processing Sophia's gentle rejection. "I was just telling His Grace that we unfortunately have prior commitments next Wednesday," Sophia explained smoothly. "Lady Hargrove has invited us for an evening of music and cards." "Oh, yes, indeed," her aunt confirmed, though she looked rather confused. "Though I'm certain we could." "We shouldn't keep Lady Hargrove waiting," Sophia interrupted, curtsying to William. "Good evening, Your Grace." As she departed on her aunt's arm, William remained near the terrace, unsettled by the exchange. Sophia was right, of course. His actions had signaled his intentions toward Miss Abernethy and Lady Emmeline, as propriety demanded. His pursuit of an advantageous marriage was not only practical but necessary. Yet the prospect of continuing that pursuit without Sophia's company, her wit, her intelligence, her refreshing candor, filled him with unexpected hollowness. For the first time, William confronted the possibility that his feelings for Sophia Whitfield had evolved beyond mere friendship or casual regard. The realization was as unwelcome as it was inconvenient. A duke could not afford to follow his heart when his duties required him to follow his ledgers. The following weeks proved challenging as William forced himself to focus on his matrimonial objectives. He called upon Miss Abernethy and escorted her family to various social functions. He engaged with Lady Emmeline at musical gatherings and garden parties. He even maintained cordial relations with Miss Fairchild, though her increasingly transparent attempts to impress him with her father's wealth were becoming rather tiresome. Throughout it all, he maintained a polite but distant relationship with Sophia, exchanging brief pleasantries when they encountered each other at social events, but never seeking her company directly. She, in turn, seemed to deliberately avoid situations where they might converse privately. The separation, intended to clarify his thinking, only heightened his awareness of how much he missed her company. Conversations with other young ladies, no matter how pleasant, lacked the intellectual stimulation and genuine connection he had experienced with Sophia. Still, duty prevailed. By early May, William had narrowed his selection to Miss Abernethy, whose combination of substantial fortune and agreeable temperament made her the most suitable candidate for a duchess. Her father had made it clear, through carefully phrased comments, that a proposal would be favorably received. All that remained was for William to formalize his offer, a step he found himself inexplicably reluctant to take. It was in this state of indecision that he attended Lady Wellington's annual garden party, an elaborate affair held at the family's estate on the outskirts of London. The extensive grounds had been transformed with tents, refreshment tables, and various entertainments scattered throughout the gardens. Musicians played from a pavilion, while guests strolled along flowering paths or gathered in conversational groups beneath the shade of ancient oak trees. William arrived mid-afternoon, immediately surrounded by the usual circle of matrons and their daughters. He performed his social duties with practiced ease, eventually extracting himself to seek refreshment at one of the champagne tables strategically positioned throughout the gardens. It was there that he encountered Admiral Whitfield, Sophia's uncle, in conversation with Lord Pembroke. "Your Grace," the Admiral greeted him warmly. "Fine afternoon for a garden party." "Indeed it is, Admiral," William replied, shaking the older man's hand. "Are you enjoying the festivities?" "As much as one can enjoy watching young people flutter about like butterflies," he said with good-natured gruffness. "Give me the quarterdeck of a ship of the line any day. But my wife insists we participate in the season while Sophia is with us." "And how is Miss Whitfield?" William inquired, striving for a casual tone. "I haven't had the pleasure of conversing with her recently." The Admiral's expression shifted subtly. "Well enough, I suppose, though quieter than usual. She's somewhere about the gardens with my wife and that Carrington fellow." "Carrington," William repeated, an unexpected tension gripping him. "James Carrington," Lord Pembroke supplied. "Viscount Westmoreland's second son, recently returned from diplomatic service in Vienna, quite taken with Miss Whitfield, by all accounts." "I see," William said, his voice carefully neutral as he suppressed an irrational surge of jealousy. "A diplomatic career is most respectable." "Respectable enough," the Admiral agreed with a slight frown, "though the boy seems rather pleased with himself for my taste. Still, he shows genuine interest in Sophia's charitable activities, which is more than can be said for most of the young bucks circling this season." William's discomfort intensified. Miss Whitfield's compassion for the less fortunate is commendable. "More than commendable," the Admiral said firmly. "My niece has a genuine desire to improve the world around her. Not many understand such conviction. Carrington at least pretends to appreciate it, though whether his interest extends beyond securing her modest inheritance remains to be seen." The conversation shifted to other topics, but William found himself increasingly distracted by the information he'd received. Who was this Carrington, and what were his intentions towards Sophia? As a second son, he would need to marry money or pursue a career. Neither scenario suggested pure motives for courting a woman of modest means. After an appropriate interval, William excused himself and began a seemingly casual circuit of the gardens, his attention focused on locating Sophia rather than appreciating Lady Wellington's horticultural achievements. He found her near the Rose Garden, seated on a stone bench beside Mrs. Whitfield and a young man who could only be Carrington, tall, fashionably dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to charm. As William approached, he observed how the man leaned toward Sophia, speaking earnestly while she listened with polite attention. "Mrs. Whitfield, Miss Whitfield," William greeted them, bowing formally. "I trust you're enjoying the afternoon." Sophia looked up, surprise and something less definable flickering across her features. "Your Grace, yes, indeed, Lady Wellington's gardens are magnificent." Huntington, Carrington acknowledged with a bow that, while correct, somehow managed to convey a hint of condescension. "A pleasure to see you again." William had no recollection of meeting the man previously, but nodded as if he did. "Carrington, I understand you've recently returned from Vienna." "Yes, a fascinating posting. I was just describing to Miss Whitfield some of the charitable initiatives I observed there. The Austrians have developed rather innovative approaches to addressing urban poverty, approaches that might well be implemented here in London with the right patronage." The deliberate emphasis on patronage, suggested Carrington, was well aware of Sophia's interests and was tailoring his conversation accordingly. William found the calculated nature of this approach distasteful, though he recognized it mirrored his own strategic courtship of Miss Abernethy. "How fascinating," William replied with deliberate blandness. "Though I imagine the political and social differences between Austria and England would necessitate significant adaptations to any such programs." Carrington's smile tightened slightly. "Naturally, Your Grace. Adaptation is essential in all endeavors, whether diplomatic or philanthropic." Mrs. Whitfield, sensing tension, interjected brightly. "Mr. Carrington has been most attentive in escorting us about the gardens. The rhododendrons are particularly splendid this year. Don't you agree, Your Grace?" "Most impressive," William confirmed, though he hadn't noticed a single flower since his arrival. "Miss Whitfield, I believe you expressed interest in Lady Wellington's collection of medicinal herbs during a previous conversation. Perhaps you would allow me to show you the herb garden. I happened to pass it earlier, and the arrangement is quite remarkable." Sophia hesitated, glancing at Carrington before responding. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't wish to abandon my present companions." "Not at all, Mrs." Whitfield assured her with transparent eagerness. "Mr. Carrington was just mentioning his desire to greet Lord Pembroke, weren't you, Mr. Carrington?" The young man clearly had expressed no such desire, but recognized he was outranked in this particular social maneuver. "Indeed, I should pay my respects. Perhaps we might continue our discussion later, Miss Whitfield." "Of course," Sophia agreed with a polite smile that revealed nothing of her true feelings. Once Carrington had departed, Mrs. Whitfield made a similar excuse about seeking refreshment, leaving William and Sophia alone, though still in full view of numerous guests, as propriety demanded. "Shall we?" William offered his arm, which Sophia accepted after a moment's hesitation. They walked in silence for several paces, following a gravel path that wound through meticulously maintained flower beds toward a secluded section of the garden. "I wasn't aware you and Lady Wellington had discussed medicinal herbs," Sophia finally remarked, her tone carefully neutral. "We haven't," William admitted. "It seemed a convenient pretext." "A pretext for what, exactly?" William paused, considering his response. The truth, that he had been overcome with irrational jealousy at the sight of her with Carrington, was hardly something he could admit. "I've missed our conversations," he said instead. Sophia glanced up at him, her expression guarded. "Have the heiresses proven less stimulating company than anticipated?" "Considerably less," he acknowledged with a wry smile. "Though that's hardly their fault. Few people possess your particular combination of intellect and candor. Qualities that make for an interesting acquaintance but a problematic wife," she observed. "I wouldn't necessarily agree." They reached the herb garden, a serene enclosure surrounded by low stone walls. Neatly arranged beds contained various plants, each labeled with both common and Latin names. "This is lovely," Sophia said, genuinely distracted from their conversation by the botanical display. She moved to examine a particular specimen, her fingers gently brushing its leaves. Digitalis purpurea, foxglove. Useful for cardiac conditions when properly prepared, though deadly in excessive quantities. "Beauty and danger in one plant," William observed, "rather like certain aspects of society." She smiled at the comparison. "Indeed. Though society's dangers are less immediately apparent than digitalis poisoning." "I don't know," William said, moving to stand beside her. "I've witnessed reputations destroyed by a single cutting remark, fortunes lost on the turn of a card, and hearts broken through calculated indifference. Society can be quite toxic in its own way. Yet we participate willingly," Sophia noted, moving to examine another plant. "Sweet woodruff. The leaves release their fragrance when crushed." She demonstrated, rubbing a leaf between her fingers and then offering her hand for him to appreciate the scent. William took her hand, inhaling the sweet, hay-like fragrance, but he found himself more affected by the warmth of her skin against his than by the herb's perfume. "Delightful," he murmured, reluctantly releasing her. Sophia withdrew her hand, a faint blush coloring her cheeks as she continued her circuit of the garden. "Tell me, Your Grace, how progresses your courtship of Miss Abernethy? I understand her father is quite eager for an alliance." The direct question caught William off guard. News travels quickly in London. "It always does when a duke is involved," she replied lightly, though something in her expression suggested the topic was not as casual as her tone implied. "Miss Abernethy is a lovely young woman with many admirable qualities," he said carefully. "That wasn't my question." William sighed, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of frustration. "The courtship progresses as expected. Her family has made their receptiveness clear. All that remains is for me to formalize my offer." "Yet you haven't done so." "No. May I ask why?" William turned away, ostensibly to examine a rosemary bush. "Various considerations require attention before such a step is taken. Financial considerations have already been addressed, from what I understand," Sophia persisted. "Miss Abernethy's dowry is substantial enough to resolve your estate difficulties. What other considerations could possibly delay you?" The directness of her inquiry, combined with the genuine confusion in her voice, provoked William's own frustration. "Perhaps I find myself reluctant to commit to a lifetime with someone whose conversation cannot extend beyond fashion and the weather," he said more sharply than intended. Sophia blinked, startled by his vehemence. "I see." "No, you don't," William continued, his carefully maintained composure beginning to fracture. "You don't see that I've spent the past weeks enduring tedious social engagements with women chosen for their fortunes rather than their companionship, all the while comparing each of them to you and finding them wanting." The admission hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Sophia stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "That's highly improper," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Exceedingly," he agreed, "and entirely inconvenient." "Your Grace." "William," he corrected. "Please." "William," she conceded, the intimacy of his given name creating a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them. "You cannot allow personal preference to override practical necessity. Your estates, your tenants, your family legacy all depend upon you making a prudent match." "I'm well aware of my responsibilities," he replied, his tone hardening. "I've spent every waking hour since inheriting the title addressing the consequences of my father's mismanagement. But is it so unreasonable to desire a wife whose company I might actually enjoy, whose mind challenges my own, whose passion for improving the world mirrors ambitions I've barely acknowledged to myself?" Sophia stepped back, visibly affected by his words, yet maintaining her composure. What you describe is a luxury few in your position can afford. We both know my fortune cannot save your estates. And if financial considerations were not paramount, William asked, moving closer. If the choice were based solely on compatibility, on genuine regard. Such hypotheticals serve no purpose, she replied, though her voice wavered slightly. Reality remains unchanged. Answer the question, Sophia. The use of her given name, a significant breach of propriety, drew a sharp intake of breath. You presume too much. Perhaps, he acknowledged. Or perhaps I'm finally being honest about what I truly want rather than what duty dictates I should pursue. Sophia's expression softened, vulnerability briefly replacing her careful reserve. What you want and what you need are different matters entirely. Whatever regard might exist between us cannot change the practical realities. Sophia. No, she interrupted firmly, regaining her composure. This conversation has already exceeded the bounds of propriety. Your Grace, I value the friendship we've developed, but I cannot, will not, be the reason you compromise your duty to your title and your dependents. Miss Abernethy will make an excellent duchess. Her fortune will secure your estates, and her pleasant nature will ensure harmonious social connections. That is the match you must make. Before William could respond, voices approached along the garden path. Sophia stepped away from him, adopting a properly distant demeanour as Lady Wellington and several guests entered the herb garden. Your Grace, Miss Whitfield, Lady Wellington exclaimed. I see you've discovered my little botanical sanctuary. Isn't it delightful? The monks who originally owned this land cultivated herbs here for centuries. Most educational, Lady Wellington, Sophia replied with perfect composure, though William could detect the tension beneath her polite smile. Your collection is impressive. The conversation turned to safe topics, the history of the estate, the upcoming events of the season, the unusually fine weather they'd been enjoying. Throughout, William maintained his expected social facade while inwardly processing the implications of their interrupted discussion. Sophia was right, of course. The practical course remained unchanged. His duty to his title, his estates, and those who depended on him required an advantageous marriage. Yet the prospect of fulfilling that duty now felt hollow in a way it hadn't before he met her. As the party prepared to return to the main gathering, Sophia excused herself to rejoin her aunt and uncle. The look she gave William as she departed conveyed both regret and resolution, a silent reinforcement of her position that personal feelings must yield to practical necessities. William watched her go, more conflicted than ever. For the first time in his adult life, he found himself questioning whether duty alone was sufficient reason to determine the course of his future. The following morning, William sat in his study, a blank sheet of paper before him. He had risen early, determined to compose a formal letter to Mr. Abernethy requesting a private meeting, the traditional prelude to offering for a gentleman's daughter. The pen remained poised above the paper, ink drying on its tip as minutes stretched into an hour without a single word written. This hesitation was ridiculous. He had made his decision weeks ago. Miss Abernethy's dowry would resolve his financial difficulties. Her pleasant temperament and proper upbringing would make her an acceptable duchess. The marriage would be no more or less convenient than thousands of other aristocratic unions throughout history. Yet each time he attempted to begin the letter, Sophia's face appeared in his mind. Her intelligent eyes, her forthright expression, the rare but transformative smile that seemed to illuminate her from within. This is madness, he muttered, setting down the pen and rising to pace the room. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Enter, he called, grateful for the distraction. His butler appeared, bearing a silver salver with several letters. The Morning Post, Your Grace, and Mr. Halloway has arrived for your appointment. Show him in, William instructed, taking the letters and setting them aside for later review. The solicitor entered moments later, his expression suggesting he brought unwelcome news. "Your Grace," he greeted William with a bow, "I appreciate your seeing me on such short notice." "You mentioned an urgent matter in your note," William replied, gesturing for the man to be seated. "I assume it concerns the estate finances." "Indeed," Holloway confirmed, opening his portfolio and extracting several documents. "I'm afraid I must inform you that Lord Carrington has called in the mortgage on your property in Derbyshire." William froze. "Lord Carrington, I wasn't aware he held that particular debt." "He acquired it recently from Barclays Bank," the solicitor explained. "It appears he has been systematically purchasing various debts held against the Vance estates over the past month." "To what purpose?" William demanded, though a sinking feeling suggested he already knew the answer. Holloway shifted uncomfortably. "I cannot speak to his lordship's motivations with certainty, Your Grace. However, the timing is noteworthy. His son has recently returned from diplomatic service abroad and is reportedly seeking to establish himself in London society." "James Carrington," William said flatly. "The very same, Your Grace. I understand he has been paying particular attention to a certain young lady this season, one with whom you yourself have been frequently seen." The implications were immediately clear. Lord Carrington was using financial leverage to eliminate competition for his son's matrimonial prospects. By calling in the mortgage at a time when William was known to be financially constrained, he effectively forced a crisis that would necessitate an immediate, advantageous marriage, removing William as a potential suitor for Sophia. "The mortgage payment is due when?" William asked, his voice dangerously controlled. 30 days from yesterday," Holloway replied. "The amount, including interest, totals just over £20,000. A substantial sum, but still less than half of what William needed to address all his financial concerns. Even if he could somehow raise the funds for this particular obligation, it would merely delay the inevitable. The broader issue remained unchanged. Without a significant infusion of capital, the dukedom would continue its slow but inexorable decline. "I see," William said, his mind already calculating possibilities. "And the other debts Lord Carrington has acquired?" "Several smaller obligations, all strategically chosen to create maximum pressure without requiring excessive capital on his part. Most have grace periods that would prevent immediate foreclosure, but together they create a concerning pattern." William nodded grimly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Holloway. Please prepare a comprehensive report of all outstanding obligations, their current holders, and payment schedules. I need to understand exactly where we stand." "Of course, Your Grace. I shall have it for you by tomorrow morning." The solicitor hesitated, then added, "If I might speak frankly." "Please do." "The simplest solution remains what we discussed previously. A marriage contract with the right family would resolve these difficulties immediately. I understand both the Abernethys and Lord Darlington would be receptive to formal negotiations." "Yes," William agreed, his expression revealing nothing of his inner conflict. "That remains the most expedient approach." After Holloway departed, William returned to his desk, his gaze falling on the still blank sheet of paper. The solicitor's news should have propelled him to immediate action, to secure an engagement with Miss Abernethy before Carrington's machinations forced even more dire circumstances. Instead, he found himself dwelling on the revelation that Carrington's father was deliberately attempting to manipulate the situation to benefit his son's pursuit of Sophia. The very idea that the man believed he could use financial pressure to eliminate William as a potential suitor ignited a possessive anger he had never before experienced. Not that William had any claim to Sophia. She had made her position quite clear. Whatever regard might exist between them, practical considerations made any deeper connection impossible. She expected, indeed encouraged, him to pursue Miss Abernethy or another heiress whose fortune could secure his dukedom. Yet the thought of Sophia being courted by James Carrington, a man whose interest seemed as calculated as his father's financial maneuvers, was unexpectedly intolerable. William's attention shifted to the Morning Post he had set aside. Sorting through the letters, he paused at one addressed in a feminine hand he didn't immediately recognize. Breaking the seal, he unfolded the page to find Sophia's neat script. "Your Grace, I hope this letter finds you well. After our conversation yesterday, I felt compelled to write, as there are matters that require clarification. First, I must apologize if anything in my manner or conversation has given you cause to question your chosen course. Your responsibilities to your title and dependents must remain paramount, and I would never wish to be the cause of any deviation from what duty requires. Second, I believe it best that we limit our interactions for the remainder of the season. Society has already noted our frequent association, and I would not wish to inspire gossip that might complicate your courtship of Miss Abernethy or other suitable candidates. Finally, I want you to know that our conversations have meant a great deal to me. Your friendship has been one of the unexpected pleasures of this season, and I shall always value the intellectual companionship we shared, however briefly. I wish you every happiness in your future marriage and trust that you will find a way to balance duty with personal fulfillment. With sincere regard, Sophia Whitfield." William read the letter twice, his reaction shifting from initial dismay to a strange, calm clarity. The carefully composed lines revealed as much in what remained unsaid as in their actual content. The formal tone, the deliberate distancing, the emphasis on duty, all suggested Sophia was protecting herself as much as reinforcing his obligations. She cared for him, perhaps more deeply than she was willing to acknowledge, and she was removing herself from his life before those feelings could develop further, convinced that their connection had no viable future. William set the letter aside and reached again for his pen, his decision crystallizing. But instead of addressing his correspondence to Mr. Abernethy, he began a different letter entirely. "Miss Whitfield, while I appreciate the sentiment behind your letter, I find myself unable to accept your proposed limitation of our acquaintance. There are matters we must discuss that cannot be adequately addressed through correspondence. I will call upon you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. If this time is inconvenient, please send word, and I will adjust my schedule accordingly. Yours, Huntington." The brevity and directness of his response would likely surprise her, but William had no patience left for the circuitous approaches dictated by social convention. The situation with Lord Carrington added urgency to a matter already too long unresolved. After dispatching his letter, William turned his attention to his financial predicament. If Carrington believed he could force William's hand through financial manipulation, he would discover that Vance did not yield easily to pressure. By evening, William had consulted with his banker, reviewed his personal investments, and explored several potential solutions to address the immediate crisis. None were ideal, but he had identified possible approaches that might at least buy him time. What remained uncertain was how to proceed regarding Sophia. The practical obstacles to their connection remained unchanged. Her modest fortune could not resolve his estate's financial difficulties, and his duty to his title and dependents still required an advantageous marriage. Yet the prospect of fulfilling that duty at the cost of a lifetime without her had become increasingly unbearable. As William prepared for bed that night, he found himself contemplating possibilities he had never before considered, unconventional solutions that might allow him to honor both his responsibilities and his heart's desires. Whether Sophia would be willing to consider such possibilities remained to be seen. The following afternoon, William's carriage arrived at the Whitfield residence precisely at 2 o'clock. As he approached the front door, he noted with some relief that the Admiral's carriage was absent from the street, suggesting the possibility of a more private conversation than might otherwise be possible. Mrs. Whitfield received him in the drawing-room, her manner betraying both surprise and poorly concealed excitement at his visit. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure. Sophia mentioned you might call, though she seemed rather unsettled by the prospect." "I hope I haven't caused any distress," William replied, though he suspected Sophia's unsettlement was precisely the reaction his direct approach had intended to provoke. "Not at all. She's just gone to freshen herself and will join us momentarily. May I offer you tea, or perhaps something stronger?" "Tea would be most welcome," he assured her, taking the seat she indicated. "Mrs." Whitfield rang for the service, then settled herself on the sofa. "I must say, we've missed your company at recent events. The Admiral was commenting just yesterday how refreshing he found your conversations compared to most of the gentlemen Sophia encounters." "The Admiral is most kind," William said. "I've found my acquaintance with your family to be one of the genuine pleasures of the season." "Really?" Mrs. Whitfield's expression brightened with undisguised hope. "That's most gratifying to hear, Your Grace, especially given. Well, there have been certain rumors circulating about your intentions toward Miss Abernethy. Not that I pay attention to gossip, of course." William was saved from responding by Sophia's arrival. She entered the drawing-room with composed dignity, though the slight tension around her mouth betrayed her nervousness. She wore a simple day dress of deep green that complemented her coloring beautifully, her hair arranged in its usual elegant but understated style. "Your Grace," she greeted him with a perfect curtsy. "How kind of you to call." William rose, bowing formally. "Miss Whitfield, I appreciate your receiving me." "I could hardly refuse a duke," she replied, her tone light but her eyes watchful as she took a seat opposite him. The arrival of the tea tray provided a welcome distraction as Mrs. Whitfield busied herself with pouring and serving. William accepted his cup with appropriate thanks, using the moment to study Sophia more carefully. She appeared composed, but the slight tremor in her hands as she accepted her tea suggested her calm was largely superficial. After several minutes of obligatory small talk about the weather and recent social events, Mrs. Whitfield rose with transparent reluctance. "I've just remembered a household matter requiring my attention. You'll excuse me for a few moments? I shan't be long." This deliberate provision of a chaperoned but relatively private conversation was a significant indication of Mrs. Whitfield's hopes regarding William's visit. Sophia clearly recognized her aunt's maneuver, her cheeks coloring slightly as the older woman departed, though the drawing-room door remained properly ajar. "Your aunt is most accommodating," William observed once they were alone. "Excessively so," Sophia agreed with a hint of rueful humor. "I apologize for her transparency." "No apology necessary. Her departure serves my purposes quite well, as I had hoped for an opportunity to speak with you privately." Sophia set her teacup aside, her expression becoming more guarded. "Your note suggested as much, though I confess I'm uncertain what matters require discussion beyond what I expressed in my letter. Perhaps we might begin with your suggestion that we limit our interactions for the remainder of the season," William said, his tone deliberately casual despite the significance of the topic. "I find myself unwilling to comply with that particular request." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. I believed it the most prudent course, considering the circumstances." "Prudent, perhaps, but not necessarily correct." William leaned forward, his gaze intent. "Sophia, Miss Whitfield, I've spent considerable time reflecting on our conversation in Lady Wellington's garden. You raised valid concerns regarding my responsibilities and the practical considerations affecting any connection between us. Those considerations remain unchanged," she pointed out quietly. "The facts, yes. My perspective on them, however, has evolved." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Are you aware that Lord Carrington has recently acquired several debts held against my estates?" The sudden change of subject clearly startled her. "No, I wasn't aware." Why would he do such a thing? His son has developed an interest in a particular young lady this season, William explained, watching her reaction closely. Lord Carrington appears to believe that by creating financial pressure, he might eliminate potential competition for his son's matrimonial prospects. Comprehension dawned in Sophia's eyes. You can't possibly mean, Mr. Carrington has shown me some attention, but I've given him no encouragement beyond basic courtesy. Nevertheless, his father seems determined to secure you as a daughter-in-law. William's tone hardened slightly. He called in the mortgage on my Derbyshire property yesterday, demanding full payment within 30 days. That's outrageous, Sophia exclaimed, genuine indignation coloring her cheeks. To use financial manipulation for such a purpose, it's unconscionable. It's also relatively ineffective, William noted dryly. While inconvenient, it doesn't fundamentally alter my circumstances. I still require a substantial infusion of capital to secure the dukedom's future, regardless of Lord Carrington's machinations. Which brings us back to the necessity of an advantageous marriage, Sophia concluded, her momentary animation fading into resignation. That remains the most straightforward solution, William acknowledged. However, I've come to question whether the straightforward path is necessarily the correct one. Sophia studied him uncertainly. I don't understand. William set aside his own teacup and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, a breach of propriety, but one that allowed him to speak more intimately without risking being overheard by servants or her aunt, should she return. In the weeks since we met, I've found myself increasingly drawn to your intelligence, your compassion, your refreshing honesty, he said quietly. What began as curiosity evolved into genuine respect, and then into something deeper. When I consider the prospect of a lifetime with a wife chosen solely for her fortune, regardless of compatibility or genuine affection, I find the idea increasingly intolerable. Sophia's breathing quickened, but she maintained her composure. This is most improper, Your Grace. William, he corrected gently, and yes, it is improper, but I find I no longer care for propriety when it demands I sacrifice happiness for convention. Your responsibilities remain paramount, he finished for her. I'm well aware of my duty to my title, my estates, and those who depend upon me, but I've begun to question whether those duties necessarily preclude personal fulfillment. He took her hand, another significant breach of etiquette that she permitted despite her evident uncertainty. Sophia, I believe there may be solutions to my financial predicament that don't require me to marry solely for money. My personal investments, while modest compared to the dukedom's needs, provide some flexibility. Certain estate assets might be liquidated without permanent damage to the legacy. Alternative financial arrangements might be negotiated. You can't possibly consider compromising your dukedom's future for a passing preference, Sophia protested, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. Is that what you believe this is? William asked, his gaze holding her steadily. A passing preference. She hesitated, vulnerability briefly replacing her careful reserve. I don't know what to believe. We've known each other only weeks. Such feelings often prove transitory when confronted with practical realities. Perhaps for some, he conceded, but I know my own mind, Sophia, and my heart. The thought of spending my life with a woman I respect but cannot love, while knowing you exist in the world, your intelligence, your passion, your genuine goodness, that prospect has become unbearable. Sophia's composure finally faltered, her eyes brightening with unshed tears. You cannot say such things. It isn't fair to either of us when the outcome cannot change. But what if it could? William pressed, tightening his grip on her hand. What if there were a way to reconcile duty with desire? Would you at least be willing to consider the possibility? Before she could respond, the sound of voices in the hallway alerted them to Mrs. Whitfield's return. They separated quickly, resuming a proper distance as the drawing-room door opened fully. Mrs. Whitfield entered, accompanied by Admiral Whitfield, whose unexpected presence suggested he had just returned home. The older man's sharp gaze took in the scene before him, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Your Grace," the Admiral greeted him with a slight bow, "I understand you've been keeping my niece company in my absence." "Indeed, sir," William replied, rising to shake the man's hand. "Miss Whitfield has been gracious enough to endure my conversation, while Mrs. Whitfield attended to household matters." "Gracious is she," the Admiral remarked with dry humor. "Not a quality I generally associate with my forthright niece, but I'm pleased to hear it nonetheless." Sophia had recovered her composure, though a faint blush still colored her cheeks. "Uncle, you make me sound positively disagreeable." "Honest, my dear, not disagreeable, a distinction your Grace has no doubt discovered for himself." William smiled, genuinely amused by the Admiral's perceptiveness. "Miss Whitfield's candor is one of her most admirable qualities." "Among many," the older man agreed, his assessing gaze moving between them with unconcealed interest. "Elena, I believe we've interrupted what appears to be a significant conversation. Perhaps we might give His Grace and Sophia a few more minutes of privacy. I'm sure the household matters that so urgently required your attention can wait a bit longer." "Mrs." Whitfield looked momentarily flustered before catching her husband's meaningful glance. "Oh, yes, of course. We'll just step out again for a short while, very short." As the older couple withdrew, closing the door to a properly respectable few inches of openness, the Admiral's voice drifted back. "A duke, Elena. Our Sophia has attracted a duke, who would have thought her stubborn principles would prove an advantage in the marriage mart." William and Sophia exchanged glances, shared amusement momentarily easing the tension between them. "My uncle lacks subtlety," Sophia observed with a small smile. "But not perception," William replied. "He seems to have grasped the nature of my visit rather quickly." The Admiral spent 40 years reading enemy intentions across stretches of open ocean. Very little escapes his notice. Her smile faded as she returned to their interrupted discussion. "William, I don't know how to respond to what you've suggested, the idea that you would consider compromising your financial security for my sake. It's both deeply moving and terribly concerning." William moved closer again, taking both her hands in his. "I'm not proposing financial ruin, Sophia. I'm suggesting that there may be solutions that allow me to meet my responsibilities while still following my heart. Will you at least give me time to explore those possibilities before dismissing the prospect entirely?" She studied him intently, as if searching for some sign of his sincerity. Whatever she saw in his expression must have reassured her, for she finally nodded. "Very well. But I want your word that you won't take any irrevocable actions regarding your estates or your courtship of Miss Abernethy until we've had an opportunity for further discussion." "You have it," he promised, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture that conveyed far more than conventional courtesy. The moment was interrupted by a discreet cough from the doorway as the Admiral reappeared. "Forgive the intrusion, but I believe you've had sufficient time for private conversation without risking my niece's reputation. Might I suggest continuing any further discussions in the presence of family?" William released Sophia's hands, acknowledging the older man's point with a respectful nod. "Of course, Admiral. Your concern for your niece's reputation does you credit." "Her happiness concerns me more," the Admiral replied bluntly, "though the two are not unrelated in our society." The remainder of William's visit passed in more conventional conversation, with Mrs. Whitfield rejoining them for tea and discussion of upcoming social events. Throughout, William maintained proper decorum while exchanging occasional glances with Sophia that conveyed the unresolved nature of their private discussion. As he prepared to depart, William addressed the Admiral directly. "Sir, I wonder if I might call upon you tomorrow morning. There are matters I wish to discuss that would benefit from your experience and insight." The older man raised an eyebrow, clearly understanding the significance of such a request. "Certainly, Your Grace. Shall we say 11 o'clock? "Perfect. Until tomorrow, then." William bowed over Mrs. Whitfield's hand, then Sophia's, allowing his fingers to linger just slightly longer than propriety dictated. "Miss Whitfield, thank you for a most enlightening conversation." "The pleasure was mine, Your Grace," she replied formally, though her eyes conveyed a more complex message of mingled hope and uncertainty. As William's carriage carried him back toward Grosvenor Square, he found himself more determined than ever to find a solution that would allow him to pursue Sophia without compromising his ducal responsibilities. The path forward remained unclear, but for the first time since inheriting his title, he felt a sense of purpose that transcended mere duty. The Duke of Huntington had arrived at Lady Wellington's garden party seeking a marriage of convenience. He had departed with the radical notion that perhaps, just perhaps, he might instead find a way to marry for love. The following morning, William arrived at the Whitfield residence precisely at 11. He had spent much of the previous evening reviewing his finances with renewed attention, identifying potential avenues that might, collectively, address his most pressing concerns without requiring an heiress's fortune. None were ideal. Some involved significant sacrifices, but the prospect of a lifetime with Sophia rather than a loveless marriage of convenience made such sacrifices seem increasingly worthwhile. The Admiral received him in his study, a comfortable room lined with nautical charts and mementos from his naval career. A model ship occupied a place of honor on the desk, and various navigational instruments were displayed in a glass cabinet. "Your Grace," the older man greeted him, offering a glass of brandy despite the early hour. "I trust you slept well after yesterday's eventful conversation with my niece." William accepted the drink with a wry smile. "I confess sleep proved somewhat elusive, Admiral." "As I expected." The Admiral gestured to an armchair before settling behind his desk. "Now, I assume your visit concerns Sophia." "Before we proceed, I should inform you that I've received a call from Lord Carrington this morning." William stiffened, regarding his son's interest in Sophia. Apparently young Carrington wishes to formalize his courtship and sought his father's intercession to secure my approval. The Admiral's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts on the matter. "Interesting timing, wouldn't you say?" "Most convenient," William agreed dryly. "Did you grant your approval?" "I informed his lordship that while Mr. Carrington seemed a respectable young man, I would make no decisions regarding Sophia's future without consulting her wishes." The Admiral took a sip of his brandy. "I also mentioned that she had received attention from various quarters this season, including yourself." William raised an eyebrow. How did he respond to that particular information? "With poorly concealed displeasure," the Admiral replied, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "It seems his lordship has developed a particular interest in seeing his son established with my niece, though I confess I find his enthusiasm somewhat excessive given Sophia's modest circumstances." "Perhaps Lord Carrington values qualities beyond financial considerations," William suggested, though they both recognized the unlikelihood of such magnanimity. "Perhaps," the Admiral agreed skeptically, "or perhaps there are other motivations at play, but enough about Carrington. You didn't come here to discuss him, I think." William set aside his barely touched brandy and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Admiral, I'll be direct. I have developed genuine regard, indeed deep affection for your niece. Under normal circumstances, I would be approaching you to request formal permission to court her, with the intention of offering marriage should my suit prove welcome. But these are not normal circumstances," the Admiral concluded, his keen gaze assessing William thoughtfully. "No, My inheritance included significant financial difficulties that conventional wisdom suggests should be addressed through an advantageous marriage. Sophia's fortune, while respectable, would be insufficient for that purpose. The Admiral nodded slowly. And yet you're here, which suggests you're contemplating a path at odds with conventional wisdom. I am, William confirmed. I've spent considerable time examining alternatives that might allow me to fulfill my responsibilities to my title and dependents without sacrificing personal happiness. And have you identified such alternatives? William outlined the strategies he had been considering. Liquidating certain non-entailed properties, restructuring tenant agreements to improve agricultural yields, leveraging his personal investments more aggressively, and potentially partnering with industrial ventures that could provide longer-term returns. None of these approaches would resolve all difficulties immediately, he acknowledged, but collectively they might provide sufficient stability to allow time for more comprehensive solutions to develop. What they would not do is provide the immediate, substantial infusion of capital that a wealthy marriage would ensure. The Admiral listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of financial matters. When William concluded his explanation, the older man remained silent for several moments, contemplating what he had heard. "You're proposing a significant gamble with your family legacy," he finally observed. "One that conventional society would consider foolhardy at best." "I'm aware of the risks," William agreed, "and I wouldn't contemplate them for trivial reasons. But I've come to believe that a lifetime with a compatible, beloved partner is worth certain financial compromises." The Admiral's weathered face relaxed into a genuine smile. "Well said, Your Grace. In my experience, money can be earned and lost, but finding a true companion for life's journey is a far rarer achievement." He rose, moving to the window that overlooked the street. "When I married Elena, my naval career offered limited prospects and uncertain income. Her family considered the match imprudent. 40 years later, I can state with absolute confidence that no financial success could have compensated for choosing differently." Turning back to William, his expression grew serious again. "However, there is a crucial difference between our situations. My decision affected primarily myself and Elena. Yours impacts numerous dependents who rely upon the dukedom's stability for their livelihoods." "A responsibility I take most seriously," William assured him. "I believe you do," the Admiral agreed, "which is why I'm inclined to support your pursuit of Sophia despite the practical concerns. A man who values integrity and personal happiness above material advantage is precisely the sort of husband I would wish for my niece." William felt a surge of gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Admiral. Your support means a great deal." "Don't thank me yet," the older man cautioned with a raised hand. "My support comes with conditions. First, you must be completely honest with Sophia about the financial realities you face. She must enter any arrangement with full understanding of the challenges ahead." "Of course," William agreed immediately. "Second, you must demonstrate that your alternative strategies have genuine viability. I won't have Sophia committed to a future of increasing financial desperation, no matter how romantic the initial impulse." "A reasonable requirement." Finally, the Admiral continued, his expression softening slightly. "You must convince me that your feelings for my niece are genuine and enduring, not merely a passing infatuation that will wither when confronted with practical difficulties." William met the older man's gaze steadily. "On that point, Admiral, I can offer absolute assurance. My regard for Sophia has developed gradually through meaningful interaction, not superficial attraction. Her intelligence, compassion, and integrity have inspired me to reconsider priorities I've maintained unquestioningly for years. That is not infatuation. It is recognition of a person whose values and character complement my own in ways I hadn't realized were possible. The Admiral studied him for a long moment before nodding with apparent satisfaction. Well articulated, Your Grace, though I would expect nothing less from a man of your education and position. Returning to his desk, he pulled open a drawer and extracted a small leather portfolio. Now, there is one additional matter you should be aware of before proceeding further with Sophia. He handed William a document bearing an official seal. Sir Thomas Whitfield, my brother and Sophia's father, was more financially astute than his modest lifestyle might have suggested. While the majority of his estate passed to his son as expected, he established a separate trust for Sophia that becomes accessible upon her marriage or her 25th birthday, whichever occurs first. William scanned the document with growing surprise. The trust, while not massive by aristocratic standards, was considerably more substantial than the modest fortune Sophia was believed to possess. "This is unexpected," he said carefully, returning the document to the Admiral. "Does Sophia know about this provision?" "She knows of the trust's existence, but not its full extent," the Admiral explained. "Thomas preferred that she marry a man who valued her for herself rather than her prospects. Given society's tendency to view unmarried women with significant fortunes as targets for fortune hunters, he thought it prudent to maintain some discretion regarding the exact figures." William absorbed this information with mixed feelings. On one hand, the trust would certainly ease some of his immediate financial concerns should he and Sophia marry. On the other, he was uncomfortably aware that this revelation might appear to conveniently resolve the very dilemma he had been wrestling with. "I appreciate your sharing this information, Admiral," he said carefully. "Though I hope you understand, it doesn't alter my fundamental intentions toward your niece. My regard for her was established long before I had any knowledge of this trust." "I believe you," the Admiral replied with unexpected directness. "Had I thought otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. I merely wished to ensure you had all relevant facts before proceeding further." William nodded, his respect for the older man increasing. "Thank you for your candor. May I ask whether you've shared this information with Lord Carrington?" The Admiral's expression hardened. "Certainly not. My brother's arrangements for Sophia are a family matter, not subject to discussion with social climbers attempting to secure advantageous matches for their offspring." "A wise position," William agreed, though he couldn't help wondering if Carrington had somehow discovered the trust's existence, explaining his otherwise puzzling eagerness to see his second son matched with a supposedly modestly circumstanced young lady. Rising to take his leave, William extended his hand to the Admiral. "I'm grateful for your trust and your conditional approval, sir. I assure you I'll honor all the requirements you've outlined." The Admiral clasped his hand firmly. "See that you do, Your Grace. My niece deserves nothing less than a man who values her above all other considerations. If you prove to be that man, you'll have not just my approval, but my wholehearted support." "And Sophia?" William asked. "Will you inform her of our discussion?" "I'll tell her we spoke about her future, yes. The specific details of your intentions, however, should come from you directly." The Admiral's eyes twinkled with sudden humor. "I believe the Hartwell Musicale this evening might provide an appropriate opportunity for further conversation. Elena and I have already accepted an invitation." "As have I," William confirmed, grateful for the Admiral's tacit cooperation. "Until this evening, then." As William departed the Whitfield residence, his mind was awhirl with new possibilities. The trust, while not resolving all his financial challenges, certainly altered the calculus of his situation. Combined with the strategies he had already been developing, it might indeed provide a viable path forward, one that allowed him to follow his heart without catastrophic consequences for his dukedom. More important than these practical considerations, however, was the Admiral's support. Having the approval of Sophia's guardian removed a significant obstacle to their potential future together. Now he needed only to convince Sophia herself that a life with him, despite the challenges they would face, offered greater promise than the safe, conventional path she seemed determined he should follow. The Hartwell Musicale provided exactly the combination of formal structure and social flexibility William required for his purposes. The evening's entertainment featured several accomplished musicians performing in Lady Hartwell's magnificent music room, with intervals between performances allowing guests to converse, promenade through the adjoining reception rooms, or take refreshment in the supper room. William arrived deliberately late, after the first performance had concluded. As he entered the main reception room, his gaze immediately sought and found Sophia, standing with her aunt and uncle near one of the tall windows. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her coloring perfectly, her hair adorned with a simple silver ornament that caught the candlelight. She appeared to be scanning the room, her expression brightening momentarily when she spotted him, a reaction quickly masked by a more composed countenance as he approached their group. "Admiral, Mrs. Whitfield," William greeted them with a bow before turning to Sophia. "Miss Whitfield, you look particularly lovely this evening." "Your Grace," she replied with a curtsy, her cheeks coloring slightly. "You're most kind." The Admiral exchanged a meaningful glance with his wife. "Elena, I believe Lady Pembroke was hoping to consult you about that charitable matter we discussed. Shall we seek her out?" "Oh, yes, of course, Mrs. Whitfield agreed, though her expression suggested she would have preferred to remain and observe William's interaction with her niece. "We'll return shortly, Sophia." As the older couple departed, William offered Sophia his arm. "Perhaps we might take a turn about the room. The next performance doesn't begin for some minutes yet." She hesitated briefly before accepting. "I should warn you that your attention will be noted. Miss Abernethy is present this evening, along with her parents." "I'm aware," William replied calmly, guiding her toward a less crowded section of the room. "However, I've made no formal commitment to Miss Abernethy, nor have I given her family reason to expect an imminent offer." Sophia glanced up at him, her expression troubled. "You discussed our situation with my uncle this morning." "I did. I found him remarkably understanding and insightful. He mentioned you had explored various approaches to your financial difficulties," she said carefully. "Approaches that might not require conventional solutions." William nodded, keeping his voice low as they strolled past various groups of guests. "I've identified several strategies that, while not providing the immediate resolution a wealthy marriage would offer, might stabilize the situation sufficiently to allow more comprehensive solutions to develop over time." "At what cost?" Sophia asked directly. "What would you be sacrificing to pursue these alternatives?" "Certain non-entailed properties would need to be sold," he acknowledged. "Some family heirlooms might be discreetly auctioned. My personal lifestyle would require adjustment. None of these measures would damage the core estates or affect the long-term viability of the dukedom." Sophia was silent for several moments as they continued their circuit of the room. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would you consider such sacrifices? Surely the simpler path remains the more prudent choice." William guided her toward a relatively secluded alcove, where a marble bust of some forgotten Roman dignitary provided the pretext for their pause. "Because I've come to believe that some considerations outweigh mere financial prudence." "Such as," she prompted, her eyes searching his face. "Happiness," he replied simply. "Companionship with someone whose mind challenges and inspires my own. A partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than social convenience." Sophia's breath caught, but she maintained her composure. "These are dangerous notions for a duke, Your Grace." "For anyone," he corrected. "Yet I find myself increasingly unwilling to sacrifice them for conventional security." Before she could respond, A bell chimed softly, signaling the imminent resumption of the musical performances. Around them, guests began moving toward the music room. "We should join the others," Sophia said, a hint of regret in her voice. "We shall," William agreed. "But first, would you permit me to call upon you tomorrow? There are matters I wish to discuss more privately than this setting allows." She studied him intently before nodding. "Very well, though I maintain that your duty to your title should take precedence over personal inclinations." "Perhaps duty and inclination need not be mutually exclusive," William suggested, offering his arm once more. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," she confirmed, allowing him to escort her back to her aunt and uncle. Throughout the remainder of the evening, William divided his attention appropriately among various guests, including a brief conversation with the Abernethys that maintained cordial relations without encouraging specific expectations. He danced once with Miss Abernethy during the informal dancing that followed the musical performances, and once with Lady Emmeline, fulfilling social obligations while carefully avoiding any actions that might be interpreted as particular attentions. He also noted, with poorly concealed irritation, that James Carrington was present and paying marked attention to Sophia. The young man maneuvered to sit near her during one performance and claimed her for a dance immediately afterward. William observed their interaction closely, relieved to note that while Sophia maintained polite cordiality, she showed none of the animation or genuine interest that characterized her conversations with those she truly enjoyed. Near the end of the evening, William managed another brief private exchange with Sophia as she stood alone momentarily near the refreshment table. "I couldn't help but notice Mr. Carrington seems particularly attentive this evening," he remarked, his tone deliberately casual. Sophia accepted the cup of punch he offered with a small smile. "He's been most persistent in his attentions recently. His father called upon my uncle this morning, apparently hoping to secure formal permission for a courtship." "And did your uncle grant such permission?" "He indicated he would consider the matter, but made no commitments," she replied. "Uncle Alexander rarely makes hasty decisions regarding important matters." William nodded, pleased by this confirmation of the Admiral's account. "A wise approach." "And your own feelings regarding Mr. Carrington's interest?" Sophia glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard before replying quietly. "I find his conversation pleasant enough, but lacking in genuine substance. His sudden enthusiasm for charitable causes seems suspiciously timed to align with my known interests." "Most perceptive," William murmured approvingly. "Besides," she added with a hint of her usual directness, "I find myself disinclined toward his suit for other reasons." "Other reasons?" William prompted, his heart quickening despite his outward composure. Sophia met his gaze briefly, vulnerability flashing across her features before she mastered it. "I believe those reasons may become clearer during our conversation tomorrow, Your Grace." The arrival of Mrs. Whitfield prevented further discussion, but as William bowed over Sophia's hand in farewell, their exchanged glance conveyed a shared understanding that transcended the formal words of parting. The Duke of Huntington departed Lady Hartwell's musicale with renewed determination. Tomorrow's conversation would be decisive, not merely regarding his relationship with Sophia, but potentially for the entire course of his future. The following day dawned clear and mild, a perfect late spring morning that seemed auspicious for matters of significance. William spent the early hours reviewing correspondence with his solicitor regarding potential liquidation of certain assets, ensuring he had accurate figures before his conversation with Sophia. At precisely 2 o'clock, he arrived at the Whitfield residence, where he was shown into the drawing room. To his surprise, only Sophia was present, though the door remained properly open to maintain propriety. "Your aunt and uncle?" he inquired after their initial greetings. "My aunt has developed a sudden headache requiring complete rest. Sophia explained with a hint of amusement. My uncle has determined that sitting with her in absolute silence is the most effective treatment. Both conditions will apparently resolve themselves in approximately 1 hour. William smiled at this transparent arrangement. How convenient. Indeed, though the housekeeper has been instructed to pass through the hallway at frequent intervals, lest our conversation stray into impropriety. Your family's concern for propriety, while simultaneously facilitating our private discussion, is quite remarkable, William observed, taking the seat she indicated. The Admiral believes in observing social forms while not allowing them to interfere with matters of genuine importance, Sophia replied. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, betraying nervousness despite her composed expression. You wish to speak with me about your alternative approaches to your financial situation. Partly, William acknowledged, though that's merely context for the more significant matter I wish to address. Sophia's breath caught almost imperceptibly. And that matter would be. William leaned forward, his expression earnest. Sophia, when I began this season, my intentions were clear and conventional. I required a wealthy marriage to resolve the financial difficulties I inherited along with my title. It was a practical approach to a practical problem, uncomplicated by emotional considerations. A perfectly reasonable strategy for someone in your position, she agreed quietly. Perhaps. But then I met you, William's voice softened. A woman who challenged my assumptions, questioned my priorities, and demonstrated through both word and action that some principles transcend practical considerations. A woman whose intelligence, compassion, and integrity increasingly captivated my attention, and eventually my heart. Sophia's cheeks flushed, but she maintained her composure. William, please allow me to continue, he requested gently. I've spent weeks attempting to reconcile my growing feelings for you with my responsibilities to my title and dependents. I've explored financial alternatives, consulted experts, and evaluated various approaches that might allow me to follow my heart without abandoning my duty. He shifted to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in his, a significant breach of propriety that she permitted without protest. What I've concluded is this. While an advantageous marriage would indeed provide the simplest solution to my financial difficulties, it would do so at a cost I am no longer willing to pay, the cost of a lifetime without you. Sophia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You cannot sacrifice your dukedom's stability for romantic notions that may not withstand practical realities. I'm proposing no such sacrifice, William assured her. The alternatives I've identified, while requiring certain compromises, would maintain the core estates and protect those who depend upon them. They would allow time for more comprehensive solutions to develop. At what personal cost, she pressed. What would you be surrendering to pursue this path? Some family heirlooms, certain properties of primarily sentimental value, the immediate restoration of the Derbyshire estate's East Wing. He smiled slightly. A life of extravagance I've never particularly valued anyway. Sophia withdrew her hands from his, rising to pace before the fireplace. This is madness, William. Society would consider you a fool to reject advantageous matches for someone like me. Society's opinion concerns me far less than my own happiness, he replied, standing to join her. And my happiness, I've discovered, is inextricably linked to yours. She turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of hope and doubt. You hardly know me. I know you care deeply for those less fortunate than yourself, not from social obligation but genuine compassion, he countered. I know you value knowledge and intellectual growth above frivolous diversions. I know you possess the courage to speak truth even when it contradicts conventional wisdom. Stepping closer, he continued. I know the sound of your laughter makes my heart lighter. I know your eyes reveal your thoughts more clearly than you perhaps realize. I know that when I contemplate a future without you in it, that future seems unbearably empty, regardless of financial security or social approval. Sophia's careful composure finally cracked, a tear escaping down her cheek. I never expected, never thought it possible. Nor did I, William admitted, gently brushing away her tear, until I met you. Taking a deep breath, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Which brings me to the true purpose of our conversation today. Sophia's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a ring, not the ostentatious diamond one might expect from a duke, but an elegant sapphire surrounded by small pearls in an antique setting. This belonged to my grandmother, William explained softly. She once told me it should go to the woman I loved, not merely the woman I married, advice I didn't fully comprehend until now. Sinking to one knee, a gesture traditionally reserved for romantic tales rather than aristocratic proposals, William held the ring before her. Sophia Whitfield, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not for fortune or title, but because I believe our lives would be immeasurably enriched by sharing them with each other. Sophia stared at him in stunned silence, her hand pressed to her lips as tears flowed freely now. For a moment that seemed to stretch eternally, William feared he had miscalculated, that her practical nature would override the feelings he believed she shared. Then, with a small sob that might have been laughter, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, though society will think us both quite mad. Rising, William slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly from suppressed emotion. Let them think what they will, we'll know the truth. He drew her into his arms, a definitive breach of propriety that neither of them seemed inclined to acknowledge, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that, while brief and gentle, sealed their commitment more effectively than any formal contract. As they separated, both slightly breathless and flushed with emotion, the sound of deliberate footsteps in the hallway reminded them of their semi-chaperoned state. Sophia stepped back to a more appropriate distance, though her radiant smile remained. My uncle will require formal notification, she said, her voice steadier now though still colored with emotion. Of course, William agreed, though I suspect he anticipates my intentions. Our conversation yesterday was quite comprehensive. Was it? Sophia tilted her head curiously. He mentioned you had discussed my future, but provided few specifics. William smiled. The Admiral believed certain matters should be communicated directly. He did, however, share one piece of information you should be aware of regarding your father's provisions for your future. Briefly, he explained what the Admiral had revealed about the trust established for her, information that clearly surprised Sophia, though she absorbed it with characteristic thoughtfulness. So my fortune is more substantial than generally believed, she mused. That certainly explains Mr. Carrington's sudden interest if his father somehow discovered the truth. It doesn't resolve all our financial challenges, William cautioned. But combined with the other measures I've identified, it provides a more stable foundation than I initially believed possible. Sophia studied him intently. Would you have made this offer without knowledge of the trust? Without hesitation, William replied honestly. I had already determined to pursue alternatives that would allow us a future together before your uncle revealed its existence. The trust merely transforms our path from challenging to merely difficult. She smiled at that, her eyes crinkling in the way he had come to cherish. A subtle but meaningful distinction. Indeed, William took her hands again, his expression growing serious. Sophia, I want you to understand completely what you're agreeing to. Our life together won't be characterized by the extravagance expected of a ducal couple. Certain sacrifices will be necessary. Society may well criticize choices they see as imprudent. Do you imagine such considerations would deter me? She asked, genuine amusement coloring her tone. William, I've spent my adult life advocating for the less fortunate and challenging social conventions. Simplicity of lifestyle is hardly a sacrifice from my perspective. Her expression softened as she continued. What matters to me is that you've chosen to value something beyond mere financial advantage, that you recognize some principles transcend practical considerations. That alignment of values means far more than any material comfort or social approval. The sound of approaching voices heralded the return of the Admiral and Mrs. Whitfield, whose headache had apparently resolved itself right on schedule. Sophia quickly adjusted her position to a more proper distance from William, though she made no attempt to hide the ring now adorning her hand. "Well," the Admiral announced as he entered, his keen gaze immediately noting the ring and his niece's glowing expression. "I see our absence has been productive." "Mrs. Whitfield followed, her delighted gasp confirming she too had observed the evidence of their engagement. "Sophia, oh my dear girl." What followed was a flurry of congratulations, embraces, and immediate practical discussions regarding announcements and wedding plans. Throughout, William observed with quiet satisfaction how naturally Sophia integrated into these conversations, her practical nature balancing his own more reserved approach. They would face challenges, certainly. Financial pressures would require careful management for years to come. Society would question his choice to marry for compatibility rather than fortune. The path ahead would demand compromises from both of them. Yet as he watched Sophia's animated discussion with her aunt regarding a simple wedding ceremony rather than the elaborate affair typically expected for a ducal marriage, William felt absolute certainty that he had chosen correctly. The Duke of Huntington had begun the season seeking a marriage of convenience. What he had found instead was something far more valuable, a partner whose strength, intelligence, and compassion would enrich his life immeasurably, regardless of financial considerations. In defying social expectations to follow his heart, William had discovered that true wealth lay not in estates or fortunes, but in the courage to value love above convention, a lesson worth far more than all the dowries in England combined. The announcement of the Duke of Huntington's engagement to Miss Sophia Whitfield generated precisely the explosion of gossip and speculation one might expect when a wealthy peer chooses a bride of modest means over the season's celebrated heiresses. Drawing rooms throughout Mayfair buzzed with theories ranging from the romantic to the scandalous. "They say he's utterly besotted with her," Lady Pembroke confided to her circle during an afternoon call. "Apparently, he declared he would rather sell every property he owns than marry anyone else." "How delightfully impractical," remarked the Dowager Countess of Merryweather with a skeptical sniff, "though I suppose Miss Whitfield has certain intellectual qualities that might appeal to a man of unusual sensibilities." "She isn't even particularly beautiful," added Miss Fairchild, whose disappointment at losing a ducal prospect had soured her usually amiable disposition. "Though I suppose she does have that unusual way of speaking about serious matters as if they actually matter." "Most inappropriate in a young lady," agreed Mrs. Abernethy, equally disgruntled by the turn of events that had deprived her daughter of a duchess's coronet. And to think, Charlotte would have brought him £50,000. What could he possibly see in the Whitfield girl to justify such a sacrifice? The speculation might have continued indefinitely had Lady Wellington not intervened with unexpected firmness. "Perhaps, my dears, the Duke sees something in Miss Whitfield that transcends monetary value, character, intelligence, genuine compassion for others. Qualities that, in my experience, prove far more enduring than beauty or fortune." This silenced the gathering momentarily before the conversation reluctantly shifted to other topics. Yet the sentiment expressed by Lady Wellington gradually gained traction as the initial shock of the engagement faded. Those who had observed the couple's interactions throughout the season began to note the genuine rapport between them, the animated conversations, the shared interests, the mutual respect evident in their every exchange. Lord Carrington, unsurprisingly, expressed public disappointment that his son's deep attachment to Miss Whitfield had been superseded by a duke's interest. Privately, he fumed at the failure of his financial manipulations to force Huntington toward more advantageous matches. His attempt to call in the Derbyshire mortgage was thwarted when William, with the Admiral's assistance, secured alternative financing through connections in the city, the first of many practical solutions the couple would implement to address the dukedom's financial challenges. Throughout the whirlwind of preparation that followed their engagement, William and Sophia maintained a united front against both social criticism and well-meaning interference. They agreed to a wedding that balanced dignity with simplicity, a ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square, followed by a reception at the Vance townhouse that was elegant but far less extravagant than typically expected for a ducal marriage. The weeks preceding their wedding provided ample opportunity for them to demonstrate the strength of their commitment, not through grand romantic gestures, but through practical cooperation in addressing the challenges before them. Together, they reviewed the dukedom's finances, identifying priorities and developing strategies that would stabilize their position without catastrophic sacrifices. Sophia's previously untapped skills in household management and practical economy proved invaluable, while William's willingness to reconsider traditional approaches to estate management revealed a flexibility that surprised even himself. "We'll need to postpone the restoration of the East Wing for at least 2 years," Sophia observed as they reviewed plans for the Derbyshire estate one evening in the townhouse library. Her aunt maintained a proper chaperone's presence, though she had diplomatically positioned herself at the far end of the room with her embroidery. 3 might be more prudent, William suggested, studying the figures before them. Unless the northern farms show significant improvement with the new drainage system. Which they should, based on the agricultural journals I've been reading, Sophia replied, pulling a notebook from the stack beside her. The Lincolnshire estate that implemented similar improvements saw yields increase by nearly 30% within 2 seasons. William smiled, watching her flip through pages of careful notes and calculations. Most brides concern themselves with trousseau selections and wedding breakfast menus. You're researching agricultural innovations and calculating projected crop yields. I find such matters far more interesting than debating the merits of Brussels lace versus Valencians, she admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Though my aunt despairs of my practical nature, she's convinced you'll regret choosing a wife with such unconventional interests. On the contrary, William assured her, covering her hand with his. Your practical nature and unconventional interests are precisely what make you the perfect partner for these challenging times. Any heiress could have provided funds to address our immediate difficulties, but money alone can't build a sustainable future. That requires intelligence, determination, and shared purpose. Sophia's expression softened. Even so, I worry sometimes that you'll regret the sacrifices you're making. The Abernethys have made it quite clear they would still welcome your attention towards Charlotte, despite the embarrassment of our engagement. The only thing I would regret, William said firmly, is a lifetime spent in polite indifference beside someone chosen solely for their fortune. Whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together with mutual respect and genuine affection. That seems a far better foundation for a marriage than financial convenience. The sincerity in his voice dispelled Sophia's moment of doubt, replacing it with renewed determination. Then we shall prove the gossips wrong and demonstrate that a marriage based on compatibility and shared values can succeed despite financial constraints. I have no doubt we will, William agreed. Though I suspect society will require considerable time to adjust to a duchess who discusses drainage systems and crop rotation with more enthusiasm than the latest fashions from Paris. Sophia laughed, the sound warming William's heart as it always did. Society will simply have to accommodate itself to disappointment on that score, though I promise to maintain appropriate dignity when required if you'll promise not to expect conventional docility in private. I would be devastated by conventional docility, he assured her with mock solemnity. Your capacity to challenge my thinking and expand my perspective is among your most valuable qualities. Such conversations, combining practical planning with genuine affection, characterized their engagement period. Each day deepened their understanding of one another, confirming that their connection transcended initial attraction to form a partnership founded on mutual respect and complementary strengths. The wedding itself, held on a perfect June morning, reflected this balance of pragmatism and genuine feeling. Sophia's gown was elegant but not extravagant, made by a talented seamstress she had met through her charitable work rather than a fashionable modiste. The flowers were largely from the Vance townhouse gardens rather than expensive hothouse blooms. The guest list, while including appropriate aristocratic representation, also featured individuals from Sophia's charitable circles whom society might have considered unsuitable for such an occasion. Yet these practical economies in no way diminished the emotional significance of the ceremony. As William watched Sophia walk toward him on her uncle's arm, her face radiant with happiness beneath a veil of simple Brussels lace, he experienced a certainty that transcended all previous doubts. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices might be required, the woman who would soon be his duchess brought something to their union far more valuable than any fortune, a partnership of minds and hearts that would enrich his life immeasurably. The vows they exchanged before the assembled guests were traditional in wording, but infused with personal meaning that those who knew them best could clearly perceive. The Admiral, standing proudly beside his niece, observed with satisfaction how their voices remained steady and sure, reflecting not the nervous excitement of infatuation, but the calm confidence of a well-considered commitment. "I now pronounce you man and wife," declared the bishop, concluding the ceremony with appropriate solemnity. "Your Grace, you may kiss your duchess." William lifted Sophia's veil, revealing a face glowing with happiness that mirrored his own. The kiss they shared, brief and proper, as befitted the setting, nonetheless conveyed a depth of feeling that silenced even the most cynical observers. The reception that followed maintained the same balance of dignity and restraint. The refreshments were excellent but not ostentatious, the music elegant but not extravagant, the overall atmosphere one of genuine celebration rather than competitive display. Throughout the afternoon, William found himself continually drawn to his new wife's side, not from duty or convention, but genuine preference for her company. They moved among their guests as a united pair, their interactions revealing a natural harmony that belied the brief duration of their acquaintance. "You appear to have confounded society's expectations quite thoroughly, Your Grace," the Admiral remarked to William during a private moment. "Half the guests seem convinced you'll regret your choice within a month, while the other half are reluctantly acknowledging they've never seen a more compatible pair." "And your assessment, Admiral?" William inquired, genuinely valuing the older man's opinion. "That my niece has found precisely the husband she deserves, one who recognizes her worth, extends far beyond conventional measures." The Admiral's weathered face softened with genuine affection. "And that you, Your Grace, have secured a partner whose strength and intelligence will prove far more valuable than any fortune in navigating the challenges ahead." "I couldn't agree more," William replied, his gaze finding Sophia across the room where she was engaged in animated conversation with Lady Wellington. "Though I confess the road ahead remains daunting at times." "All worthwhile journeys are," the Admiral observed philosophically. "But they're considerably more manageable with the right companion at your side." As the celebration continued, William reflected on how dramatically his expectations had transformed since the season began. He had entered society seeking a marriage of convenience, a practical solution to practical problems, uncomplicated by emotional considerations. Instead, he had found a connection that challenged his assumptions, expanded his perspective, and ultimately offered something far more valuable than mere financial security. In choosing Sophia, despite practical obstacles, he had defied social conventions that prioritized advantage over compatibility. Yet he had never felt more certain of any decision in his life. The Duke had indeed sought a marriage of convenience. What he found instead was a love that defied society's expectations, a partnership founded on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that would prove more enduring than any alliance based solely on financial advantage. As the afternoon waned and guests began to depart, William approached his wife, offering his arm with a smile that conveyed far more than words could express. "Shall we bid our guests farewell, Your Grace?" he asked, the formal address softened by the warmth in his voice. Sophia accepted his arm, her eyes reflecting the same quiet happiness. "Indeed, Your Grace, I believe our future awaits." Together, they moved toward the entrance hall, united not by social convention or financial necessity, but by a choice made with clear-eyed awareness of both the challenges and possibilities that lay ahead. A choice to value love above convenience, compatibility above advantage, and shared purpose above society's expectations. It was a choice that would transform not just their lives, but the very foundation of the dukedom they would build together, a legacy far richer and more enduring than either could have achieved alone.